Athanasi was slowly starving to death because it was such a huge ordeal just to get the food, that the food would often run out. And once people realized the food would run out before the end of the day, and people would start pushing in line, and Athanasi was weak and pregnant, and she wasn't getting any food. So she probably would have died because of that challenge. But I met some years later someone who was involved in the camp at that time, and they were explaining the challenges they're facing.
Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I am your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 2 of our 5-part series with David Browning from Enveritas. And today we are going to be talking about wet mills and the innovation of mechanical demucilage within Africa. So, David, tell us about this story that you have for us, this project that you guys worked on.
Yeah, so long before Enveritas was formed. This is not an Enveritas story. This is pre-Enveritas. Okay. But around about 20 years ago, a little less than 20 years ago, we realized that there was an opportunity to help smallholder farmers by moving from semi-washed to fully washed coffee. So going from a world where farmers would have a hand pulper that they do. We would talk with farmers who would actually pound their coffee with a rock. That's how they would get the skin and the pulp off. And you can imagine what that does to the quality of the bean. But the specialty industry was growing. We could see that was just really taking off in the 90s, and as we headed into the 2000s. And so there was a tremendous appetite for new coffees and for high quality coffees. And but we saw there were some real barriers to a lot of smallholders and their ability to get fully washed coffee. There was an innovation that was happening over in the Americas, in Colombia, with mechanical demucilage. It was effectively a much smaller, much less capital intensive way to do the processing of the coffee. You didn't need these huge irrigation channels that you've probably seen if you've gone out to old 80 or 100 years old. It was a much smaller footprint, much less capital cost. So we really liked it. We thought this was an opportunity it was something within the realm that smallholder farmers could band together, form a group. They could put this in place. We could show them how to do it, and you could get these very significant quality premiums, which is what happened. And so I went out to the Gates Foundation. They got excited about the idea, and we decided we'd do this across 4 countries in Africa to actually introduce this new technology. Wet milling had certainly existed for a long time. Mechanical demucilage did not. Not only did we have to persuade farmers who you can imagine could be, in many cases, were fairly skeptical about what this might be. We also had to persuade coffee companies, and I wish I had taped all these specialty coffee companies at the time who swore to me that this quality would never
take off.
We were largely doing it because we felt like this is a way within the realm of farmers that they would be able to get premiums of 30, 40, 50 cents per pound. Across large populations, and so that was we were motivated. It also had an environmental benefit. It used a lot less water, so that was good from an environmental point of view, particularly places where there's increasingly going to be water shortages going forward. But and I know Lee, you and I chatted before we started the podcast. The reason I wanted to share the story is not just that was ended up being a very effective intervention, and I think in total now, my back of the envelope tally would be that's put about $10 million into the pockets of East African farmers every year now going forward. So it's probably about $100 million farm gate, additionally to what they were earning before, without counting. There was a ripple effect, which is once we put the mills in that we put in for 200,000 farmers. Other entrepreneurs saw the benefit, power of this, and so it just led to a whole new industry that sprung up. But I do want to talk about one particular story that which I think just speaks to that there's a lot of things that go on that we don't necessarily get to see. Melinda Gates wanted to come out and see the project, and she asked if she could talk to a farmer to really hear what a farmer had to say. And we knew that was going to be very problematic, because when Melinda comes to Africa, you can imagine she's got security minders, there are government officials. There's a scrum of about 10 to 15 people, and communications people, and boom mics, and imagine a smallholder farmer getting a little overwhelmed. So we decided we'd go out and just pick a couple of farmers and get their story and be able to tell it in a very quiet way, where they could just be relaxed and tell their story, and then we'd share that with Melinda, which is what we did, and so we went out to and we really didn't look very hard. We pretty much just picked a couple of farmers that were close at hand, and one was a woman by the name of Athanasi, who had a remarkable story, but underneath the story is another story. So she was a farmer in Rwanda when the genocide broke out. She flee Rwanda, where she lived in a refugee camp for a few years, then came back. She joined the project, and her income went up, and sort of life went on. So the project sort of did what it was meant to do. But in talking with her and really starting understanding her story, and in talking to other people over the years that I've come across years later, there's a far more interesting story that evolves. So Athanasi was pregnant at the time of the genocide, and she was suffering tremendous morning sickness. So it was almost impossible for her to walk the distance to the border. So you basically had nearly 1 million people on the move who had to get by foot. They had to get to the extremity of their country, and it was highly unlikely that she was going to make it. And so she basically sat down under a tree and decided that she would just die, just wait for the Interahamwe to come, and she would die. But a stranger came and offered his help and helped her get out of the country. She doesn't know his name, or probably never see him again, but someone came and got her across the border to safety, to a refugee camp, which was the largest refugee camp of the world, Banako, one of the largest at the time, in Tanzania. It literally sprang out of the dust, and there was 500,000 people suddenly in a matter of weeks. There's a 500,000 city. Wow. You can imagine structure, no governance, just an extraordinary task to sort of manage the human complexity. Adding to that complexity was a lot of Hutus who were fleeing the Rwandan army that was coming after them, also came into this camp. So now you had Hutu and Tutsi in the same camp with 500,000 people. Athanasi was slowly starving to death, because it was such a huge ordeal just to get the food, that the food would often run out. And once people realized the food would run out before the end of the day, then people would start pushing in line. And Athanasi was weak and pregnant, and she wasn't getting any food. So she probably would have died because of that challenge. But I met some years later someone who was involved in the camp at that time, and they were explaining the challenges they're facing.
Folks, our first on-demand workshop, How to Become a Coffee Consultant, is now available for you to learn at your own pace for just €50, and it comes with a certificate upon completion. Go to mapitforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for more details. Support this podcast by supporting our sponsors.
And they innovated by changing to a system where all over the camp, people had to elect into little democratic pods, and they had to elect one person to come for the whole group. So you found a group of people you trusted and one person you trusted in your group. That effectively shrank the line by 90%. So suddenly you had a much, much smaller amount of lines, so you could get through everyone. And the amount of food you're giving out was in larger parcels, so they didn't misjudge how much they had to give to each person. So just that innovation probably saved Athanasi's life. But around that time, after that innovation came into place, she probably would have died again, because a cholera epidemic started to sweep through the refugee camps up in the north, up around Goma, up in what is now the DRC. And it was probably only a matter of weeks before it would have hit Banako. Tens of thousands died in the other camp. And given her weakened state, very high likelihood that Athanasi would have died. But I met a person who sort of saw what's happening and just realized that with lightning speed, they had to put in place all the sort of preventative measures and hygiene measures and training, but just had to be done at absolute warp speed. And the cholera epidemic was averted. She gave birth to her daughter, but as you can imagine, between nearly starving to death and the way she described it to us as after a daughter was born, was that the mother was fading away. People could see the child, but the mother was becoming invisible, so she didn't think she would survive. And so after dodging a cholera epidemic and the Hutus who were still roaming the camp, and all of these other trials and tribulations, she named her daughter Demucilage, which means I'll give you a name if you survive. And
wow.
About four of her children had died. So this was the state of fatalism that she existed in. But to give birth, she literally just lay down on the ground. She said, when I gave birth, I just lay down on the ground with 1,000 people watching and gave birth on the ground in the dirt. So the chance of her daughter surviving were slim. But Demucilage did survive. They went back to Rwanda, where they joined the project. And about a year after joining the project, incomes went up. Demucilage contracted malaria, and she probably would have died of malaria. But with the extra income, Atanazi and all the people in her group had bought health insurance for $10, so $10 for the year. And with that, she was able to take her daughter to a clinic. She got the prophylactics she needed, was home the next day. And Demucilage went on to continue her schooling for many, many years. But I say that because so much of this story is just completely invisible, and there are people out there all over the world doing things, and they're not necessarily always talked about. They don't necessarily get a lot of recognition, and they're not looking for recognition. But it is easy, I think, to receive so much negative press. The negative stories have so much more power to them than positives in media, that it's easy just to forget that this actually happens. But for me, it's just a remarkable example of just so many different people out there who are doing work, and all of this intersecting with a single woman's life. But obviously, this is happening every day all over the world. So it's encouraging to know that, and obviously for that to be an example for all of us, and for us to lean in where we can when the opportunity presents itself to help out. And that's very much what Enveritas is about.
What does it feel like to be you? Like to be in the middle of that kind of profoundness? What does it feel like?
It doesn't feel profound at all. I think I remember years ago, someone asked Muhammad Yunus about microfinance, and did he have some grand plan, and how it all come together? And he said, no, I just sort of solved the next problem that's in front of me. And I think, as you'll see in the future podcasts, it has been very much just a task of being fairly clear of what you believe and what you think should be worked on. And I think that poverty is one of the great moral questions of the 21st century. So it wasn't hard for me to decide that that's what I want to work on. And then it's really no more magical than finding a problem, solving it, finding another problem, solving it. We didn't really. I wasn't looking to re-engineer sustainability verification. It was more that in our conversations with farmers and with companies, we realized that there was something really important happening, that the world wanted to understand more about sustainable sourcing, but we just saw there was going to need to be something had to be re-engineered. So it was really just solving a problem that was in front of us. So I would say that's how it feels like every day, is to wake up and just solve the problems that are in front of us and then keep moving.
Yeah, truly inspiring. In the next episode, we're going to talk about water waste management at wet mills. Tune in for this one, folks. It's another great story. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in, friends. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast. Firstly, become a paid member of our YouTube channel. Secondly, you can join our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before you leave, and check the show notes for more information. Now, this is what you should check out next.